Hi, this is Sarah Nance, and this is my Module 3 assignment for special education interviews. So during my interviews, I interviewed 3 people, obviously. The first one is Abby Kuhlman. She actually is my sister. She is an assistant principal at Arapahoe High School and Littleton Public Schools. She also attended Fort Hays State University for her degree in building and leadership. I also interviewed Mary Allman, who is a former colleague of mine, now works in Knoxville. She was a special ed teacher at my high school, Eagle Crest. And then also Nicole Zuniga, who is a para at East High School, which is in Denver. She's a friend from college. So I broke down each of the questions on our modules page. And so they just had a ton of information. All 3 of them were really eager to talk to me about each of these. And it was kind of interesting hearing what they had to say and how they differed and how they overlapped and for similarities. So I'll do my best to keep it short. I just put them in 3 columns and kind of went with that. So first of all, for the child find procedures, pretty standard. I think Abby, my sister, had it the best, kind of had to synthesize all of it. Basically, the Child Find team offers free screenings to students, and that's the case also with Nicole as well in Denver. Very similar in Knoxville, it seemed like, with Mary. Basically, developmental screenings for newborns and children up to 5 years, and if they show delays in development, that could interfere with their education and learning, there's extra steps to be taken. So following screenings, parents can find feedback from the Child Find team, and they can recommend further assessment. But screenings are not for kindergarten readiness. And I actually found that also too in the Knoxville one. They had something about kindergarten too. Obviously, if delays are detected, the team kind of consists, I guess, as Mary said, she was a little bit more detailed, of an occupational therapist or a speech and language pathologist, a school psychologist. So a team is formed to assess the student. And it provides general information about the motor skills, pre-academic skills for those students, about an hour-long test, and again, there was something in there about kindergarten. Nicole was same. She said that she consulted the Colorado Department of Education website, I guess. She said there's a ton of resources there about compliance, committees, and accountability. And she was going into detail about hearing and vision, emotional, autism spectrum disorders, traumatic brain injuries, which I forgot about, would qualify a student for some services, and early identification measures. For the challenging part, Abby talked a lot about parents, and she was really specific that sometimes parents, even with students who already have accommodations, but those who don't as well, sometimes demand services out of nowhere, which she said feels like an abuse of the system. Parents feeling kind of entitled to just ask and receive for whatever they want, which isn't always the case. She also talked about how students struggle. That's really a challenging part. So even when there are accommodations in place, when students still don't find success, I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective. Mary, our SPED teacher, talked about teachers who push against the IEP process, or that they don't support or value students in their general education classes. She talked about how some teachers see the word IEP or the acronym IEP and just they automatically panic and don't want to help or support. And that can be really challenging, as it takes an entire team to get a student through education, right? So when one person is missing or is negative or not involved, it really impacts a student. She found a lot of pushback from teachers who aren't as supportive, which is unfortunate. Nicole talked about the communication factor, that she's kind of lower on the totem pole, she admitted, that there's a lot of communication that has to take place between teachers, paras, administrators, and parents. So there's a lot of moving parts, lots of people, and a lot of information gets lost in translation. She also talked about maintaining a high quality staff. There's a lot of turnover rate in her role, and funding can be a big part of that, as paras aren't paid maybe as highly as actual special ed teachers or caseworkers. The rewarding part, very consistent with all 3 here. When an IEP or when the IEP playing field seems to be leveled and students find success, that tends to be the most rewarding part for all three. It's incredibly gratifying, or it clicks, and you can witness, and it's exciting to see that change. Abby also pointed out when a student is able to come off an IEP or a 504 can be really rewarding as well. So again, Mary said talked about when students get a concept or find success. That can really change their perspective of school. And then another level that Nicole added was praise. She said that she gets a lot of praise for her work, and it happens often, which makes her job really rewarding. For supervision of special ed staff, again, lots of information here. What I thought actually of the three of these was the trust factor. Mary talked specifically that people involved in a student's team are they're professionals, and so it'd be great if those supervising them were willing to communicate respectfully, trust those team members to play out their roles, so they'll feel like equals, and that, of course, is what's best for students. So regardless of experience, members of a student's team need the opportunity to have thorough training. They deserve that. They deserve to be involved in communication. That I thought was pretty moving. As far as Nicole, who is someone who is supervised, she said she would love more feedback and would love more access to sensitive materials. She said she sometimes feels in the dark with all the details about a student for whatever reason. And as someone who's a little bit lower on that hierarchy, she would love more invitations to meetings and PLCs. Sometimes as a true para, she gets a little bit overlooked. She wants to be treated as a certified staff member rather than just an hourly worker, which is, as a true paraprofessional, she is on a lower pay grade and not a certified member of the staff. As far as working with parents, Abby and Mary had some interesting things to say. They talked about how parents can be really opinionated, and they are the advocates for their children, and so that tends to make them feel like they get the say and for everything, which is often true, but not always. So Abby talked about how parents need to be clear on their rights as parents and clear on procedures. They should have regular updates regarding their students' progress. And so parents, as Mary said, need different things at different times. So it's important to start off the school year with communication, with a vision, so that parents can become assets and allies instead of enemies. Nicole talked about how it's more difficult as a parent since they're not really the one in charge of care or plans, and sometimes they're just a helpful observer or aid. She has alleviated that by calling home, sending notes home, attending as many IEPs and 504s as she can, and trying to really listen to the parents when she's able to. For advice, Abby talked about attending district training. She said that she knew the theories behind special education. A lot of that was through her training at Fort Hays, but actually going and being involved was one of the best ways that she became familiar with what goes on in her district. Mary talked about reading and being up to date on procedural safeguards for the state, getting to know the students and the case managers, being a source of support for teachers and students in the special ed department. And she said that the best advice she could give also was to talk to special education teachers to get to know them, because there's a lot of turnover and they get burned out. So being positive role models and helpers would be really good as far as advice for her. To go with that, Nicole talked about making paras feel valued, welcomed, and necessary. Do what you can for funding and be vocal about that. And know that everyone has an opinion, so including paras, so balance opinions when making decisions. Working with regular education, all three of them talked about communication, visibility and transparency, making an extra effort to support teachers in order to retain them. Mary talked about it too, relationship building and communication. As far as placing special ed students in general ed classes, there needs to be some communication there. Teachers have fantastic advice and strategies to help students. And so, special ed teachers need to realize that regular ed teachers often have really great ideas too. So again, it just comes down to communication emailing concerns, attending meetings. Sometimes teachers ignore or know best, and paras want to feel valued too. They want to comment and offer advice on IEP reviews when necessary. As far as the role between these two, I just wanted to I think Nicole said it the best, that the relationship between a special ed teacher and a building principal probably needs to be even more collaborative than with general education teachers. Abby said as much too. It requires a level of communication that is different than a gen ed teacher relationship. The special ed teacher acts as a teacher, mentor, leader, and advocate, and so the building principal has to trust these professionals and also support them in their own leadership decisions for a student. The principal leads the building in regards to culture, so they can guide and model positivity. That's what Mary had to say, by ensuring special education teachers are listened to and supported. As far as characteristics, Abby, I thought this was really well said, just a willingness to include. Since our society is becoming more and more inclusive of students, that somebody who is willing to include everyone and be that person in a safe learning environment is really important to her as an administrator. Mary talked about patience, support, and understanding of extra work that's involved with being a special ed teacher, as well as that understanding of federal implications. Nicole said the same thing. The best administrators are open and communicative. They're collaborative and humble. Sometimes they may not know the best. And so again, that kind of goes with that visibility and transparency that Abby was talking about, making sure that you consult everyone on a team, including paras, who would also makes them feel valued. Some of the things that she talked about as well. So finally, for a reflection and projection, I thought there was a lot of overlap, especially between communication and collaboration between all three of them. The parents seem to be, upon further discussion with each of them, the parents seem to be kind of a sticking point. The parents can be absolute hindrances to the process, but they can also be the best advocates and helpers. So I thought that was really interesting. Moving forward, as I learn more about special education and measures, I think it's important to keep in mind the parent, key to that, and then the relationship between teachers, paras, and the building administrator. The building administrator has to be the leader, the ultimate leader, but needs to involve everyone in the process. That's going to keep up with retention rates. Paras and special ed teachers will be more inclined to stay at a building, be more willing to work with a variety of stakeholders and team members. And so I think a lot of that's super important too. I think knowing that each student has different needs and that communication will foster the best outcome for those students, I think that's also really important. I really enjoyed interviewing all three of these people in my life, and I thought that it was going to be really hard to get them all on the same page, or that they'd be vastly different, but I found that they actually shared a lot of things in common. So it was actually really interesting and fun. Thank you so much for watching.